Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Glad to be here.
Today we're going to be looking at the aftermath of the LA wildfires in the Palisades.
Right.
We're really going to try to go beyond those initial headlines that we all saw and understand the lasting impact on this community.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of really interesting sources for this one.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be looking at firsthand accounts from some residents' news reports, and we've even got some footage of the relief efforts to kind of bring this to life.
That's great.
So it's a story of loss, but it's also a story of resilience and community and...
I think one of the things that is so often overlooked in these situations is that the damage really goes far beyond just the immediate loss of property.
Right.
You know, it's about the disruption to the fabric of a community, the places and routines that give people a sense of belonging and stability.
It's like pulling a thread on a tapestry and just watching it all unravel, isn't it?
Exactly.
And the sources that we've gathered for this one really paint a picture of that unraveling in the Palisades.
Yeah. You know, one example, the Palisades Methodist Church was destroyed in the fire.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, obviously that's a significant loss to the congregation.
Of course, yeah.
But think about all the other ways that that church served the community.
Right.
You know, Sunday school AA meetings. They even had a preschool there.
Wow.
And so losing that central hub really has this ripple effect that touches so many lives.
And it's not just the loss of the physical structures. They said over 5,000 homes were destroyed in these fires.
Yeah, it's a staggering number.
But then you have places like Palisades Elementary School.
Right.
Thankfully, the building itself was spared.
Good.
But 35 families from that school community, including 5 teachers, lost their homes.
Oh, wow.
So, it really highlights how these events, these disasters disrupt not just homes, but those entire support systems that children rely on.
Absolutely.
Can you imagine trying to focus on schoolwork when you've lost your home and your familiar routines and that sense of security,
It's impossible.
And that makes me think about that term social emotional support, which comes up a lot in our sources. For folks who might not be familiar, can you explain what that means in this context?
Sure. So social emotional support refers to helping people, especially children, kind of process the emotional and social impacts of a really traumatic event.
Right.
So it's about providing tools to cope with, anxiety, fear, grief, and this huge disruption to their sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
And, it can involve counseling, group activities, even just creating safe spaces to, talk and be heard.
And it sounds so crucial, especially for a community, grappling with such widespread loss.
Absolutely.
And speaking of loss, the sources also touch on the closure of these beloved local businesses like Mort's Deli and Cafe Vida.
Yeah, I love those places.
I imagine that just adds another layer of hardship to an already really difficult situation.
It does because, these businesses weren't just places to, grab a bite or a cup of coffee.
Right.
They were really anchors of the community.
Yeah.
They employed local residents, provided a sense of familiarity and connection.
Yeah.
And their closure represents not just an economic blow, but a social one as well.
It really does make you think about the human side of all these statistics, doesn't it?
It does.
And that brings us to actress Jennifer Garner,
Okay.
who's a longtime Palisades resident. And her perspective is kind of woven throughout a lot of these sources.
Right.
And it sounds like the fires had a really profound impact on her.
They did. She speaks very candidly about just feeling really overwhelmed by the devastation and wanting to help in any way she can.
Yeah.
And one quote that really stood out to me was, it's just like, I feel almost guilty walking through my house. Just, what can I do? How can I help? What can I offer?
Yeah, I think that feeling of helplessness and that urge to just do something, I think it resonates with a lot of people who witness these kinds of tragedies.
It does.
And it sounds like she experienced a very personal loss as well.
Yes, she mentioned losing a friend who didn't make it out in time.
Oh, wow.
Which really underscores the human cost of these disasters.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that behind the statistics are, real people, real families grappling with unimaginable loss.
It's heartbreaking, but amidst all this devastation, there are also these stories of hope and resilience emerging as well.
Absolutely.
And we see that in the immediate response of organizations like World Central Kitchen.
Right.
Which I understand was on the ground very quickly after these fires started.
Yeah, I mean, what's remarkable about World Central Kitchen is their ability to mobilize so swiftly and effectively.
Yeah.
I mean, they were literally setting up food trucks and serving meals to evacuees and first responders within an hour of the fires breaking out.
Wow, that's incredible.
And Chef Jose Andres himself was there, leading the effort.
It reminds me of something that he said. He said, in the worst moments of humanity, the best of humanity shows up.
And it's true.
And it's that spirit of compassion and action that really shines through in these moments.
Yeah. But as we kind of move beyond that initial response and look towards the long-term recovery,
Right.
a key question emerges.
Okay.
Will that support last?
That's a concern that both Chef Andres and Jennifer Garner voice in our sources.
Yeah.
It's the sense of urgency to not let the community be forgotten as those headlines fade and the world kind of moves on.
Right, because they both stress the need for sustained support on multiple levels.
Yeah.
You know, funding for rebuilding, providing an emotional and social support, especially for children.
Right.
And fostering that sense of community engagement that, we're in this together spirit.
It makes you wonder, what does that sustained support look like in action?
Exactly.
What are some concrete examples of, how it's making a difference?
Well, there's this fascinating YouTube video that you shared with me about World Central Kitchen's work in Lahaina, Hawaii, after the devastating wildfires there,
Right.
which offers some really powerful insights.
I'm really curious to hear more about that. What struck you about their approach in Lahaina?
Okay.
And how does it relate to what we're seeing in the Palisades?
Well, what's striking is the consistency in their approach. Whether it's Lahaina or the Palisades, they show up immediately.
Okay.
They focus on understanding the community's specific needs.
Yeah.
And they provide not just nourishment, but also a sense of hope.
Right.
That feeling that someone cares that they're not alone.
It sounds like they're not just providing meals.
Right.
They're rebuilding a sense of community one plate at a time.
Exactly. And that's a powerful model for how we as a society can move beyond those, initial bursts of support and embrace a more sustained, meaningful approach to disaster recovery.
That's a perfect segue into our next point. But before we get there, let's take a quick pause.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll delve deeper into that long-term recovery process and explore some practical ways that all of us can contribute.
Right.
Even if we're not directly affected or living in the affected area.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
So we're back. And, before the break, we were talking about World Central Kitchen's work in Lahaina.
And I'm really curious to hear more about what specifically stood out to you as a model for that long-term recovery.
Well, in that video you shared, there's this really powerful moment where Chef Andres is talking about, the importance of not just rebuilding homes, but rebuilding lives.
Yeah. It's so easy to focus on, that physical rebuilding, the bricks and mortar.
Right.
But the emotional and the social aspects of recovery are just as important, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that's something World Central Kitchen seems to just understand intuitively.
Yeah.
They recognize that a hot meal can be more than just sustenance.
Right.
It can be a symbol of hope,
Yeah.
a gesture of care, a small step towards normalcy in the midst of all that chaos.
Yeah. It's that human connection, that sense of being seen and cared for, that can make such a world of difference.
Right.
In those early days and weeks after a disaster.
Precisely. And, it's not just about that immediate response.
Right.
In Lahaina, World Central Kitchen actually partnered with local chefs and farmers,
Oh, wow.
helping them get back on their feet
Okay.
and contributing to the island's economic recovery as well.
So it's not just providing aid.
Right.
It's empowering the community to rebuild itself.
Exactly.
It's not a handout, it's a hand up.
Exactly. And that approach aligns with something that Jennifer Garner really emphasized as well.
Yeah.
Which is the need to provide children with the social emotional support they need to process their experiences and rebuild their lives.
She was so passionate about that, wasn't she?
She was.
And I remember her saying something like, they don't have schools here any longer. It's having to go from here to build a new life.
It's a poignant reminder that for children especially,
Right.
the loss extends far beyond just the physical.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that disruption of routines, the loss of those familiar spaces, the anxiety of having to start over.
Yeah.
It's incredibly disorienting.
It makes me think about how Jennifer Garner described those alphabet streets in the Palisades, where children would play. And that friend's house with the gong that the kids would ring.
Yeah.
These were more than just places,
Where they were.
They were touchstones of normalcy and connection for these kids.
And those seemingly small details can have such a profound impact on a child's sense of security and well-being.
Yeah.
Their loss can be deeply unsettling, and it really underscores the importance of not just rebuilding structures,
Right.
but restoring those everyday rituals and connections that contribute to a child's sense of belonging.
Yeah, it's about weaving that tapestry back together, thread by thread.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, the sources also highlight the economic impact of these fires,
Okay.
particularly on those local businesses.
Yeah,
I remember reading about Mort's Deli and Cafe Vida.
absolutely.
Those were real community hubs.
They were, and their closure represents a loss, not just for the owners and the employees,
Right.
but for the entire community.
Yeah.
These businesses were gathering places,
Yeah.
sources of employment, and familiar landmarks that contributed to the neighborhood's identity.
It's a ripple effect. You lose a home, you lose a school,
Right.
you lose a local business, and suddenly that fabric of that community starts to fray.
And that's why it's so crucial to support those businesses during the recovery process.
Right.
Patronizing them, even from afar, if they have, an online presence,
Yeah.
can make a difference.
Yeah.
Sharing their stories and encouraging others to support them can help them get back on their feet.
It's about showing that even though the spotlight might have moved on,
Right.
we haven't forgotten them.
Exactly.
We're still here and we're still invested in their recovery.
Yeah. And that brings us back to that key question.
Okay.
How do we as individuals contribute to this long-term recovery process,
Right.
even if we're not directly affected or living in the affected area?
It can feel so overwhelming, almost paralyzing.
It can.
You see that devastation, you feel this urge to help,
Right.
but where do you even begin?
It's a natural response, but it's important to remember that even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Donating to reputable organizations like World Central Kitchen or local charities working on the ground is a tangible way to contribute.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be this, huge sum of money.
It doesn't.
Even a recurring donation of like $5 or $10 a month
Right.
can really add up and provide that much needed sustained support.
Absolutely. And beyond financial contributions,
Yeah.
consider, volunteering your time or skills.
Right.
Many organizations need help with everything from sorting donations
Okay.
to providing emotional support
Yeah.
to rebuilding homes.
And even if you can't physically be there,
Right.
there are so many ways to volunteer remotely.
Absolutely.
You could offer administrative support, help with fundraising efforts, or even just spread awareness
Right.
through your social networks.
And let's not underestimate the power of simple acts of kindness.
Yeah.
Checking in on friends or family members who might be affected.
Sending a care package, offering a listening ear.
Right.
These small gestures can mean the world to someone struggling to cope.
It's about fostering those human connections, reminding them that they're not alone, that we're all in this together.
Exactly.
It's about that sustained compassion, that commitment to showing up even when the cameras are gone.
Precisely. And I think that's the most powerful takeaway from this deep dive.
Yeah.
Recovery isn't a sprint, it's a marathon.
Right.
And it's a marathon we can all run together,
Yeah.
each of us contributing in our own way to ensure that these communities are supported, remembered, and ultimately able to thrive again.
That's a beautiful thought, and I think it's a great place to wrap up our discussion today.
Okay.
But before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
All right.
What will your contribution to this marathon be?
That's a good question.
How will you help ensure that these communities aren't forgotten and receive the support they need to heal and rebuild? It's a question worth reflecting on because even those small acts of kindness, when multiplied across a community, can have a profound impact.
That's such a powerful point, that even small acts of kindness can have that ripple effect.
They can.
And it makes me think back to what we were talking about earlier, that idea of recovery being a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
So what does that marathon look like in a practical sense?
Well, I think it starts with just recognizing that recovery is a multifaceted process.
Right.
It's not just about, rebuilding physical structures.
Yeah.
It's about addressing the economic, the social, and the emotional needs of a community.
Right.
And those needs, they kind of evolve over time.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach?
No.
What might be crucial in those first few weeks or months after a disaster
Right.
might look very different, a year or two down the line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, in the immediate aftermath, the focus is often on providing, those really basic necessities, food, shelter, medical care.
Of course.
But as time goes on, that focus shifts to things like rebuilding homes and businesses, providing mental health services, and supporting children as they reintegrate into school and social settings.
And that's where that idea of sustained engagement comes in.
Exactly.
It's about being in it for the long haul, adapting our support as those needs change.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, big organizations or government agencies.
Right.
Individual actions can make a real difference.
Yeah.
We talked about, donating to reputable organizations like World Central Kitchen. But there are also, local charities and community groups that are working tirelessly on the ground.
Yeah.
Even a small recurring donation can provide those organizations with, the steady funding they need to really sustain their efforts over time.
Right. And for those who might not be in a position to contribute financially,
Right.
there are other ways to help, right?
Absolutely. Volunteering is such a powerful way to contribute your time and your skills. And it doesn't have to involve, physically being in the affected area.
Right.
Many organizations need help with things that can be done remotely, like administrative tasks, social media outreach, or fundraising.
Yeah, and let's not forget about that simple act of spreading awareness,
Yeah.
sharing information about the ongoing needs of these communities, highlighting the work of organizations that are doing great things, keeping that conversation going.
Right.
Even after the initial media attention kind of fades away.
It's like tending a garden.
Yeah.
You can't just, plant the seeds and walk away.
Right.
You need to water, weed, nurture those plants over time for them to truly flourish.
Yeah.
And it's the same with community rebuilding.
Right.
It requires that ongoing care and attention, that commitment to being there for the long haul.
It does. And it's not just about, that practical support.
Yeah.
It's also about fostering those human connections that we talked about.
Yep.
Reaching out to friends or family members who might have been affected, sending a care package, offering a listening ear. Those small gestures can go such a long way in reminding people that they're not alone, that they're part of a community that cares.
And I think that's ultimately what this deep dive has been about.
Yeah.
Recognizing that recovery is a collective effort.
It is.
It's about individual actions, community initiatives, and larger organizations all working together towards a shared goal.
It's about understanding that we all have a role to play, no matter how big or small.
We do.
In supporting these communities as they rebuild and heal.
And it's about remembering that compassion and empathy aren't finite resources.
Right.
The more we give, the more we have to share.
So well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the aftermath of the LA wildfires.
It's been my pleasure.
And the power of community resilience. We hope this conversation has left you feeling, informed, inspired, and maybe even a little bit more connected to the communities we've discussed today.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep making those ripples.
Take care.